Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to your early warning briefing from Forward Observer for Wednesday, the 16th of July, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. With the transition to back to Forward Observer is almost complete. We're working on a couple things on the site, and we're otherwise up at initial operating capacity. So, listen, if you watch the show every day and you like the briefing, you like what we do, come join us. Sign up for an account at Forward Observer and get access to our news and intelligence platform. Lots to come there. All right, with that, let's go ahead and jump inside the Beltway here, starting with this lawsuit from the Department of Justice. This is kind of an odd case. So back in April, President Trump fired 3 directors who worked at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and he fired them, but they did not leave their jobs. And they they filed a lawsuit against their firing, and a judge refused to grant their request for an injunction while their lawsuit is heard, and they have remained on the job. They continue to participate in board meetings and also take place in voting for the certain actions for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And the DOJ says, quote, all of this is manifestly unlawful. I'm kind of unsure how they get physical access or how they're, at any rate, there's a DOJ lawsuit. And I don't know, maybe another judge will rule that they cannot go to work anymore. We'll see. All right, moving on. There's growing speculation that Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell may be fired. His term is supposed to last until May 2026. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said yesterday that a formal process to choose his successor is underway, and National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett said over the weekend that Powell's firing, quote, was being looked into. You know, I've seen some arguments on this. Just briefly, President Trump wants to fire Jay Powell because Powell, along with the governing board of the Federal Reserve, refuses to cut interest rates. Frankly, keeping Powell on through May, if there is any kind of financial or economic turbulence, I think President Trump would blame Powell if he stays in that job. If Powell's gone, I don't know. Well, I guess maybe President Trump may be a little more justified if he fires Powell. By the way, I see a lot of legal analysts say it's not lawful. Moving on, the Pentagon announced that they are removing about half of the 4,700 National Guard troops from Los Angeles. They are demobilizing 2,000 National Guardsmen, and they say that is because the lawlessness in Los Angeles is subsiding. Also, Representative LaMonica McIver, Democrat from New Jersey, she's a member of Congress who was arrested for allegedly assaulting a federal agent during this May protest against an ICE facility in Newark, New Jersey. You probably saw the video. I actually think we played it on the show. Well, she reported a record quarter for fundraising. She raised over $750,000, and apparently that is greater than the total that she's raised over her entire congressional career, allegedly. Moving on, the Department of Education is investigating now the University of Michigan for, quote, inaccurate and incomplete disclosures of foreign funding. The Department of Education also cites the recent Chinese students charged with potential agroterrorism for bringing this wheat fungus into the United States. They say that's a cause for concern with the university's inaccurate reporting. And apparently, Jared, actually, if you can jump on real quick since you're the China guy. So apparently the University of Michigan is getting funding from NGOs that are connected to foreign governments, e.g. the Chinese Communist Party.
Yes, and there's all kinds of discrepancies that they have. It's not just, oh, well, we didn't list them, but we went back, we changed the records, now they're back on there. So it's accurate, but we didn't do it on time. It's all, if you were doing a spot check on these people, you would go, okay, well, hey, what the heck? Additionally, so even though they don't cite the other 2 students that were bringing in biological matter, remember the agroterrorism was the 3rd Chinese student at the University of Michigan inside of a couple of weeks that was arrested for this kind of stuff. So I think there's going to be a much greater investigation into the University of Michigan over all of this stuff and seeing what kind of ties they actually have with China.
Right.
The DOJ did say that this is on the order of tens of millions of dollars as well.
All right. Well, let's move on here, and we'll keep you on for this U.S. shipbuilding thing. So John Conrad is the, I think, founder, but at least the CEO of G Captain. He's also a former merchant marine. He had this long post yesterday about all the problems that the United States had with shipbuilding. And Jared, this is something that you and Robert have both talked about repeatedly. U.S. simply needs more ships. Apparently, there are some people who in the shipping business who do not want more ships because they say that will reduce the value of their ships. So not a good thing for national security. At any rate, what I'm going to reach out to him. Let's maybe get him on the show. Maybe we can do it like a quick interview this week or next and actually talk about the shipbuilding problem. But Jared, as a former ship guy, what's the latest?
So couple of the highlights. The shipbuilding office at the National Security Council is closed. The Ships Act appears to be stalled in committee. And the Maritime Executive Order on rebuild our entire maritime sector is just not being fulfilled. And what is marked as fulfilled is likely just signed off and not actually done, which is gravely concerning. Like you're saying, it's done, so it should be done. Additionally, the White House Special Assistant for Shipbuilding was fired I think he said this last week. And I mean, basically, yes, none of this is good, but like even the most positive way to interpret all this is that this is just a no change to the status quo, which is not good. The United States, if it's to achieve the Fortress North America objective or even maintaining its Navy, it needs to rebuild shipbuilding capacity, because shipbuilding capacity also translates into ship repair capacity. And quite simply, it's just not there.
Interesting. Now, in the case of the shipbuilding office at the National Security Council being closed, that's something new from the Trump administration. I wonder if someone at the National Security Council, do we need an entire office dedicated to shipbuilding, or can we just keep some core personnel and move them to a different office? Jared, do you know any details there?
I don't know the details there. If it's wrapping them up into another mission area, that to me seems like a grave disservice to the entire maritime industry, because the U.S., even though it's the size of a continent, it is technically a maritime nation, maritime empire, if you want, because we don't have a threat to the north, not technically. Our border to the south actually has a major river, so we have two very good borders and just wide open expanse into the oceans on either side. We are a maritime nation.
Sure. Yeah, maritime security is absolutely critical. All right. Just last point here. I remember even 10 years ago, the Navy talking about lack of sea lift capacity. And if you want to get into a scenario where we have a crisis or conflict in the Indo-Pacific, it doesn't matter what our rate of missile manufacturing is, how many rockets, artillery, munitions, troops, tanks, whatever we're sending over there. It doesn't matter if we can't get them over there. And we knew this was a problem 10 years ago. And there's been a lot of talk about building more Navy ships, and it just doesn't seem like that's happening.
Yeah, it's not. And this stuff does take time. It's not like ships can be built overnight. And
but this is 10 years ago.
Right.
They're talking about lack of sea lift capacity.
That's what I was going to get at, is like, there's you have to make this move 10, 20 years out, and we're still behind the ball from when it could potentially be used.
All right. What it seems to me, there's been a lot of talk about basically how Congress is not going to do anything about the debt problem until we have a crisis and they're forced into some action, which is going to be a lot more painful and a lot more messy than it otherwise could have been. And it sure seems like we're heading into a scenario where we're forced into ramping up production rather than doing it voluntarily. All right. Thanks for that, Jared. Meanwhile, immigration arrests under the Trump administration have more than tripled from last year. Last year, there's about an average of 300 arrests per day for the whole year. And now we are getting up to 1,100 arrests per day in June 2025. But if you ask President Trump, those are rookie numbers. Got to get those numbers up. He wants 3,000 arrests per day. So you look at the operational tempo that we've seen from ICE and federal law enforcement, local law enforcement across the country. They still need to triple that to get to President Trump and Stephen Miller's goal. Let's move on. By the way, the Financial Times, next slide there, Jared. The Financial Times actually had like a pretty good roll up this morning. You do have to pay for it. So if you're an FT subscriber, hop on. They have this map here, which is interesting. It's in this morning's report. We'll send it out to everyone. It shows the private detention facilities across the country. So if you're concerned about protests, direct action demonstrations, etc., and you live near one of these, it would behoove you to see, check out your backyard, see if you have one of these near you. And with that, we'll move on here to the global sit rep. So Jared, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum came out with an update, and basically she just said a lot more Mexicans and some also foreign nationals have been deported from the United States.
Yes. So this was during her morning press conference. She said that 75,341 people have been repatriated to Mexico since the 20th of January, 2025. Of those, about 68,000, the number you see on screen, were Mexicans, with 6,500 of them being other foreigners that were merely deported from the United States. And I think that's actually important to note that she's including she's making repatriations a broad category here of deportations and also people who's voluntarily left. Again, something important to note here is that Mexico does have an active repatriation program that we covered a couple of weeks ago. They said they are handling significant numbers. Here's our first real, or at least first good indicator about this is working for them. They are repatriating their own people, because 75,000 people is, I don't think it's quite more than what ICE has done, but that's a huge portion of it if it's not.
So hang on. So is this update Mexican nationals who have been deported or who have self-deported?
She includes both in that. It's repatriated and deported.
There's got to be more than 70,000 Mexicans who have self-deported now. Yeah. We're talking about 20 million people in this country illegally. Maybe it's not. Listen, Jared, in the first 6 months of this administration, they've deported fewer than 70,000 Mexicans. Those are rookie numbers. All right.
I do wonder if there's a bit of internal migration going on, because Ohio, here where I am, is not an ICE hotspot. And I've noticed a significant increase in people who were not here 6 months ago. Mm-hmm. So okay. I kind of wonder if they're just moving around the states to try to avoid being deported.
I'm sure there's some level of that going on. Also, I have noticed, I've seen maybe half a dozen articles just this week combing through the news about individuals self-deporting. There was one lady, sob story. She and her husband were packing up with their kids to go back to Mexico because they didn't want to go to Alligator Alcatraz. So I think that message is probably hitting home. All right. Thanks for that. Let's go ahead and move on, and we will, Jared, I'll just let you finish up the global sit rep.
So moving on to the Israeli government, there's some significant instability developing over there. We covered that the ultra-Orthodox Jewish parties there were considering leaving the government coalition. They're doing that this week. Now, this should be finalized by the end of the week. The actual ruling party, Likud, does not expect the Orthodox to initiate a dissolution of the government before the summer recess, but they do think that is still on the table. It could be something that they use in order to actually achieve their internal objectives. The reason this is concerning is that it's unstable, and Netanyahu is widely believed to be continuing the war just to maintain his control over their government. So if he feels like he's about to lose power, which Likud needs these people in order to actually maintain it, I think he could attempt to expand the war again just to stay in office. Mm-hmm, and sure. If they don't achieve it in the next 2 weeks, they go into a significant recess, I think, until October. So that gives him plenty of time to spin up operations, get it going, and just go, hey, we're still at war. You don't change horses. Moving over to Taiwan, the Taiwanese president is considering stops in New York and Dallas in August on his annual trip to his remaining allies down in Latin America. On last year's trip, Taiwan claims that China responded with its, quote, largest naval deployment in years. And that was just after Lai, the Taiwanese president, transited Guam and Hawaii. He didn't even really make a stop, just transited it. Tentatively, the dates are the 4th of August for New York and the 14th of August for Dallas. So we probably would not see a significant response until end of August, maybe even early September. And then lastly, staying in Pacific Islands, the Pentagon awarded a $295 million contract to construct a new command center over in Guam. And this is to coordinate Guam's air and missile defenses, which the Pentagon has been building these up for a couple of years now. Now, this new command center is expected to finish by 2029, notably well after the Davidson Windows start date, but it will serve as a multi-service headquarters to develop what they're calling a comprehensive integrated air and missile defense umbrella of the island. And it's because basically the services aren't quite talking to each other. Here would be a central governing authority on that to maintain basically you name a mission for logistics or even force projection, Guam does it. They are trying to maintain the security of Guam. And that's been a big talking point for, well, China can just reach out and touch Guam and annihilate Guam. That's changing significantly.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, insert obligatory Guam tipping over joke. But number two, Jared, this is I remember for years, a decade at least, they've been talking about missile defense against China in Guam. Looking at this new headquarters / command center, is this something that's going to be offensive, or is this only to coordinate the missile defense of Guam?
This appears to just be defensive for missile and air defense.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that. All right. And then moving on, we're tracking 76 protests today, a bit above baseline, but nothing too crazy. President Trump is urging Texas officials, reportedly on a phone call yesterday, to conduct a mid-decade redistricting of the state. And this is in order to produce 5 additional House seats. And I think this is something that could be done. Senator John Cornyn said yesterday, quote, Hispanic voters in Texas have rapidly shifted in favor of the GOP, in large part thanks to President Trump. So a mid-decade redistricting will mean significant gains for Texas Republicans. And this is actually true. You look in the Rio Grande Valley, which is this sliver of land in South Texas, that deep red area right there, whatever district that is, I don't recall off the top of my head. That's the Rio Grande Valley. Heavily Hispanic, heavily voted for Trump in 2024. In response to this, so you look at this and you say, okay, maybe. I don't think it's going to be in the 2026 midterms, but for 2028, Texas feasibly could have 5 additional Republican House seats. There's going to be a large court battle over this. And actually, I think the courts have actually struck down a number of these redistricting programs that appear to heavily favor one political party over another, typically Republicans. But in response, California Governor Gavin Newsom said that California could respond in kind to negate any possible GOP advantage in the House. Newsom implied that all 9 GOP seats could be erased if California chooses to do a mid-decade redistricting as well. And this is all going to play out in the courts, but certainly interesting for 26 and 28. And with that, there was an interesting House hearing yesterday on drone warfare. The hearing was entitled Surveillance, Sabotage, and Strikes, Industry Perspectives on How Drone Warfare Abroad is Transforming Threats at Home. And they covered some alarming vulnerabilities facing U.S. critical infrastructure. I'll just go through some of the high points here. Authorities recorded about 13,000 drone incursions over U.S. power generation sites in 2024. The authorities have also discovered drones modified with copper wire, and this is apparently intended to short-circuit power substations. Apparently, you put that copper wire and it messes with the conducting, or I don't know exactly how it works, but the intended effect is to short-circuit these power substations. Seems pretty important. The state of Georgia reported 774 drone flights over prisons. About 720 of those were contraband drops. And again, that was from 2023 to 2024. NFL stadiums reported almost 3,000 drone incursions in 2023. Now, this is interesting. There's a short part about Langley Air Force Base, and it was subjected to 17 consecutive nights of drone swarm incursions. Not only were authorities unable to stop them, they were unable to locate or identify the drone pilots wherever they were piloting remotely. 17 consecutive nights, could not stop them, could not find them. That is extremely alarming. According to DHS, law enforcement is only able to respond to less than 1% of the thousands of counter drone requests. So you might have a local or state authority asking for federal help to come in and conduct some of these counter drone operations, and they can only respond to less than 1% of them. The panelists here recommended a number of things. Number one, implementing a unified low altitude airspace management system. And what this is going to do, this is going to be some expansion of federal authority, maybe under the FAA, but it's going to allow authorities to identify and track drones. The testimony that was provided from the three individuals, they also included calls to develop a friend or foe system that will tag drones with 3 tags: compliant, unknown, or hostile. And compliant drones are registered, flying within FAA regulations. Unknown are probably not registered or maybe flying outside of FAA regulations. And then hostile, and they want to do that to speed up targeting and security decision making. It's actually a very complex process, as I understand it. If you're going to call federal authorities out to try to down a drone, there's a lot of FAA rules and regulations are in place. So this, at least in theory, would speed up that decision-making process if this friend or foe system identifies it, tags a certain drone as hostile. Panelists also encouraged an equip and train program to enable local law enforcement to order landings or seize non-compliant drones. So apparently one of the drone defense companies, unsurprisingly, said, yeah, federal government should buy more of our stuff. Not exactly he said this, but yeah, they should buy more of our stuff and give it out to local law enforcement. But that's probably what we're looking at. Testimony also stated that most policies and regulations to actually deal with drones already exist on paper, but they just haven't been implemented. So, with that, this has long been a problem, and every time there's some new whiz-bang advancement in drone technology or drone attack, the consequences for national security are quite profound. Speaking of national security, Microsoft, according to a report from ProPublica, Microsoft hired engineers in China to help maintain Department of Defense computer systems for the past decade. And one of those Microsoft employees, speaking anonymously said, quote, "We're trusting that what they're doing isn't malicious, but we really can't tell." And apparently these U.S. overseers, apparently at least some of them are not actually experts in code. So they actually can't go into the code or go into the specific actions of what these engineers in China are doing to defense computer systems, Department of Defense networks. So China continues to exploit the United States in many ways, but I'll tell you just broadly, there are at least 2 strategic vulnerabilities that they are just beating like a drum. The first is our quote unquote open nature, the open nature of our society. That is a counterintelligence challenge, really a counterintelligence nightmare, because Chinese nationals are able to enter the country. They can enroll in U.S. universities. They can participate in sensitive research and development at those universities. They can even get jobs working for U.S. technology companies. If you haven't heard already, China has this thing called 1,000 Talents program or 1,000 Talents plan. 1,000 Talents plan, and that incentivizes the sharing of foreign technology with the Chinese government. And that is aimed directly at exploiting these types of opportunities. There's a 2022 report from Los Alamos National Laboratory, and they found that over 150 Chinese scientists who previously worked at U.S. national labs, so doing sensitive research and development in technology, over 150 of those Chinese scientists had returned to China in order to work on Chinese national military technologies. So China benefits heavily either way. Chinese nationals working on U.S. projects can share data and technology. Literally, sometimes they just load massive amounts of data on a thumb drive and leave the United States and go to China. So that's one way they benefit. The other way is when they leave the United States and they take a job in China, they leave with all that knowledge and experience that they bring back to those Chinese programs. So that's just a massive way to undermine U.S., not just competitive economic and industrial competitiveness, but also in military technology. The second way that China exploits the United States is the U.S. government and its various agencies and programs. It's just such a bureaucratic labyrinth that regulators can't easily identify or even stop certain actions or activities that are taken outside the interests of national security. We know this because for a long time we've been covering this. The use of Chinese labor and the use of Chinese parts from subcontractors involved in U.S. defense manufacturing. That's a really great example of how the Defense Department and these U.S. defense contractors may not even be aware that these problems exist. So in short, you look at the federal bureaucracy and you say, well, it's not too big to fail, but it is way too big to protect. And it's just another reason why we should continue to expect these kinds of exploits that come out in the news. I mean, it's like every week now we're hearing something similar to this, sometimes multiple times a week. Moving on. The White House is this is according to a Washington Post article, so let's wait 24 hours before we say it's true or not. But according to this article, the Trump administration is requesting voter rolls and election data, including on voting machines, from at least 9 states. One of those states includes Colorado, and this report claims that at least 2 of those states have complied. They have given the state voter rolls up to whatever office at the White House is requesting these. We may be facing another protracted legal battle that shapes the 2026 midterms and or the 2028 general election. First of all, there will be legal challenges to this. But for their part, if this report is true, the Trump administration almost certainly is doing this because they want to ensure that states are actually removing ineligible voters, removing deceased citizens, removing illegal aliens who may have registered, removing individuals otherwise who are ineligible but registered to vote. This is a responsibility of the individual states, and these states have their own laws and regulations regarding who gets removed and when. There have been a lot of court fights over this previously. States do receive some federal help in matters such as cybersecurity, but it's unusual for the White House to be requesting voter rolls or requesting access to actually inspect some of this voting equipment. So you look at this, it's pretty plain to see. Your view of this is going to hinge on your political ideology, number one. But this is almost certainly going to trigger a firestorm of legal and political resistance, especially if the Trump administration escalates and says, well, you can't not do this voluntarily. We're going to try to make you comply with this, which is a possibility. By the way, on that, I look at the United States. There's a comment here about end stage of empires. You look at the United States, or I do, and I say there's basically 3 things holding us together, right? The centripetal force. I've talked about that gyroscope. It's like this pin and it has this disc in the middle and you spin it. And as long as that disc in the middle is spinning, that gyroscope will stay upright. When I was a kid, I had one and I'd spin it and I would take a pencil and I'd try to just tap that disc, like just nick the disc and it'd start to wobble and then it would fall over. And I would see how many times I could nick that and keep it upright. That's the United States, in my opinion, that we have 3 large centripetal forces that are keeping that disc spinning. Number 1 is free and fair elections, or the perception of free and fair elections. Number 2 is a relatively strong and stable economy, especially relative to other economies. And then the third is a relatively strong and stable dollar. It is relatively strong still and relatively stable compared to all other currencies. Realistically, looking at the next 10 years, all 3 of those things are at risk of deteriorating. And so if your working theory or your key assumption is that those are the three centripetal forces keeping the United States upright, then a logical conclusion or a rational hypothesis would be if those are affected, then U.S. stability will also be affected. So just looking forward, it's one of many reasons to be prepared, be cognizant of what could happen. That's what we do here 5 days a week. And over on our website, forwardobserver.com, if you'd like to join us, join the intelligence and news and really information sharing network. We can get out ahead on some of these problems, better understand these problems so we can be better prepared for them. Join us, forwardobserver.com. All right, with that, let's go ahead and move on here. Another example of our Swiss cheese-like national security. According to a DHS memo, Department of Homeland Security memo, Salt Typhoon, which is a state-sponsored Chinese hacking group, advanced persistent threat, conducted a 9-month cyber exploitation campaign, stealing sensitive information from an undisclosed state's National Guard. So the DHS did not say which state this was. I think we have some really good clues. I'll talk about that in just a second. This hack, quote, likely provided Beijing with data that could facilitate the hacking of other states' Army National Guard units and possibly many of their state-level cybersecurity partners, end quote. That's in the DHS report. It continues. If Salt Typhoon succeeded in the latter, if they succeeded in disrupting these state-level cybersecurity partners, it could hamstring state-level cybersecurity partners' ability to defend U.S. critical infrastructure against Chinese cyber campaigns in the event of a crisis or a conflict. Asked for comment. Actually, Jared, I want to get your take on this here. Asked for comment, the Chinese embassy said that hacking is a threat that's faced by all countries, and they said the United States, quote, has not been able to produce conclusive and reliable evidence that the Salt Typhoon is linked to the Chinese government. Now, Jared, when I always want to call this lady Yao Ming, but it's
Mao Ning.
Mao Ning. Yeah, there you go. Mao Ning. All right. She's one of the Chinese foreign ministry spokespersons. And for a year, I would read them every day, the transcripts. And it seems like not always, but it seems like China is doing a lot more to address this. And it's not just a simple denial. They're trying to kind of explain this. Is that what you get from those transcripts?
Somewhat, yes. It always seems to me like they're exploiting plausible deniability and just going, well, hey, these aren't government employees. They're not us. They're just private, not us. Because if you reread that quote and we, take a look at it carefully, it's linked to the Chinese government. Okay, so not denying that it happened, just denying that they're responsible for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good takeaway. They didn't deny that it happened. Yeah, fantastic. All right, thanks for that, Jared. And let's go ahead and. Oh yeah, so bottom line here is, DHS doesn't tell us which state this is. I don't know which state this is, but if I just had to guess, I'd say it's probably the Virginia National Guard. And one of the big reasons I would say Virginia is because that's the home of the National Guard Bureau. Alternatively, the National Guard does have these, I think they call them cyber protection teams, and they are tasked with defending National Guard and some defense networks. So China could have gained access to information about network infrastructure, as well as information about National Guard personnel, especially those assigned to cybersecurity units. And if no one's reading between the lines here, it's been obvious for a long time that China intends to target U.S., or at least they're preparing to target U.S. critical infrastructure during a period of crisis or conflict. Those possible targets include obviously telecommunications, information, energy, other industries or sectors that degrade U.S. military readiness and ability to respond. If you're China, one of the best things you can do is leverage your cyber capabilities to slow the response, to slow the U.S. response and also the coalition response to a Chinese blockade of Taiwan, if or when that happens. And so my general advice, I've got a little bit of advice here. Number one, Ham radio is going to become a lot more important if our information and communications sectors are degraded or being attacked by Chinese cyber activities. Your local information network, so not stuff that you get off the news or social media, but the stuff that you predominantly get from other human beings. In the Army, we said every soldier is a sensor. Every member of your neighborhood is a sensor. So those local information networks, whether you're able to text each other or whether you're able to just speak person to person in meet space as opposed to digital space, whether you're using carrier pigeons or smoke signals, however you decide to communicate, via radio especially, all that is going to become far more important. And that is another reason why you should be developing those local information networks. I talk about this every week. By the way, if you don't know, every Tuesday, I do Attack Intel Tuesday. So it's 30, 60 minutes. I talk about intelligence, how to build local intelligence systems. I'll reemphasize at the local level because that's what you'll be dependent upon in a crisis. So these things are going to be not only more important, but they're going to be critical for navigating this potential national crisis if or when the United States and China do get into an armed conflict. And I would just add, it doesn't even have to be an armed conflict. It just has to be a period of crisis. And I mean, depends on who you ask, whether on the likelihood of, is the United States and China going to war? I'd say it's more likely than not. And with that, we'll move on to Mexico. This is actually very encouraging to see this increased cooperation between the United States and Mexico. The Department of Justice announced the extradition and U.S. arrest of a Pakistani national who was indicted by a grand jury for running an alien smuggling ring. This guy, Abbas Ali Haider, is accused of helping Pakistani nationals. First of all, he goes to these countries, to Colombia, Panama, and Brazil, and he sets up a front company. It's a film production company. And then he gets these Pakistani nationals to go to these three countries under the auspices of some film project. Oh, they're going to shoot some film here in Brazil, Colombia, or Panama. And once those Pakistani nationals are in those countries, they would then travel to Mexico and then up to the border and then illegally enter the United States into Arizona, California, and Texas. So this is another really great example of how organized and how international these smuggling rings actually are. This is not just Central Americans wanting to come to the United States to throw shingles up on your roof in suburbia. This is organized. It is coordinated. A lot of money being made, and more likely than not, a lot of this stuff has been happening for extremely nefarious purposes. But some good news coming out of Mexico. I'm quite encouraged by this. I think there's obviously some bad hombres in Mexico who are not Mexican, and it's very good to see Mexico actually extraditing these people to the United States. With that, Jared, Taiwan is preparing for the United States to run a potential Chinese blockade. What's new?
Sure are. So this is during the annual Han Kuang exercise, which they run it every year, and it's really been focused much more on an appropriate response now. And during this drill, the whole drill this year has been, how do we deal with the blockade? The Taiwanese Navy and Air Force practice escorting an American landing ship from an American carrier strike group into an eastern port city. On the map here, you can see Hualien on the basically right above the main Taiwan label. That's where they were going. During this, they offloaded supplies and exited the port, and basically the entire exercise took place in under 6 hours. Now, Taiwan used a former U.S. Navy Anchorage class landing ship. They have one in their stock. They have it as part of their Navy, and they use that to simulate a U.S. supply ship. But per Taiwanese defense officials, they expect the U.S. to resupply Taiwan in the event of a blockade, but the U.S. may use civilian ships to conduct the transport. Now, I want to step back and say that again. They expect the U.S. to run the blockade and resupply Taiwan. They expect that to happen, but it does not necessarily have to be a United States Navy or a U.S. Merchant Marine ship in order to do that. They could use civilian ships. Now, Why does this matter? The U.S. is likely advising Taiwan on exactly how they would do this. Just throw that out there. That is probably happening if they are not actively participating in these drills. I don't think they are actively participating in these drills because we do not have anybody in the area right now to do so. But there's no reason they could not have advisors on station. Now, the public nature of these drills should signal to all parties, China, US, Taiwan, Japan, the audience here at Forward Observer, that the United States will violate a Chinese blockade of Taiwan if necessary. It's been a long-standing assumption here. I think we can safely say we have confirmation of it. If Taiwan is saying we expect this to happen, it's probably coming from not Taiwan, but the US. Now, the Chinese will likely take this as an act of war, the running of a blockade, not the practice of a drill, and attack any resupply vessels in order to weaken Taiwan, because they need Taiwan to actually starve out. That's the point of a blockade. Now, this also highly incentivizes China to just prevent the U.S. from even being capable of sending supplies to Taiwan. And now, what does that mean? Cyber attacks on ports, yes. Stalling Chinese merchant ships in our harbors, I think, is not off the table. Basically, you control shipping, go there, park in a very inconvenient place, and really delay shipping there. But the most important ones, I think, that China could do, and I think we have strong evidence that they will do, is disrupting liquid natural gas, coal, and petroleum processing to reduce any surplus we could send to Taiwan. Taiwan is extremely energy import dependent. If you cut those off at the source, it makes it near impossible for Taiwan to hold out. Additionally, Taiwan's food import dependent, not as much, but some. If you disrupt food production and processing, you can cause a crisis. That's two birds with one stone here. Cause a crisis inside of the United States, and also prevent any surpluses from being used to feed Taiwan. Now, I bring that up because we have seen that the preparatory stages for that in the University of Michigan, which we covered earlier in the show. The last one that I want to bring up, which Mike covered earlier in the National Guard piece, using access to National Guard and Defense Department systems to prevent or confuse deployment of troops. If you can send the wrong paperwork or say, delete paperwork, all of this gets much harder to do because that paperwork is part of the logistics to actually get troops where they need to go. If you don't have the orders, if you don't have proof of funding, if you don't have all of that necessary paperwork, it doesn't happen.
Jared, those are excellent points, especially on the crisis. So just looking at how this could play out, I think the foregone conclusion is that China, as they ready to execute a blockade on Taiwan, China is going to use cyber attacks or some level of cyber exploitation simultaneously against the United States, right? I mean, that has been the kind of the key assumption by inside the Beltway defense establishment, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in terms of putting the United States into a moral dilemma, let's say that did happen. It seems to me that a response is really going to depend on who the president is. But in the case of, in terms of an act of war, okay, this is something that Congress has to do, but the president is obviously allowed to do some level of overseas contingency operations, like bombing countries and ordering strikes against Iran. Obviously did not happen without congressional approval. But just looking at this, who fires first in this blockade running scenario? Because you have, if you're China and you want to impose a strategic dilemma on the United States, if China fires first on U.S. civilian or military vessels, that's obviously an act of war. And now that's something that could be justified. If you're China, do you want to push a U.S. president into making a unilateral decision to fire at China without an act of war, knowing that it's going to potentially cause a political crisis here at home?
Absolutely not. If I'm China, I'm trying to actually seize Taiwan here, and particularly if I'm using a blockade, I want to keep the U.S. out of this as long as possible. So that means not shooting at the ships, which I didn't include this in the initial report, but Taiwan actually did not say that the U.S. broke the blockade, but that Taiwan eliminated the forces there, and then they escorted it in to prevent long-range fires. So they're assuming that the United States will not take the first shot. They will not destroy, presumably, a Chinese carrier strike group that's out there. They will just respond to a newly developed hole by Taiwan in that blockade. That said, if I think China may use this to escalate, where the last thing you want to do is fire on American forces. Maybe let one of these go through, respond with cyber attacks on ports. And that doesn't mean cause major fires in ports. That's just basically the same thing as what I was talking about with the Department of Defense. Shut down certain systems, delay certain actions. Hey, man, now my crane's got a fault in it. I can't operate it. I need to repair this. You delay it by a day. All that stacks up. So I think they would go that route. And that would match very, very closely to what we were saying with the Chinese National Guard hack, where you have plausible deniability. You go, hey, yeah, it wasn't really us. Don't escalate. It wasn't us. And that always the Chinese are always going to try to put the onus of action. Basically, they want to make America look like it fired first. They have to do that because that makes their war defensive. As if America keeps running blockades, which, keep in mind, I do expect the Japanese and Filipinos to be involved in this as well. I think that's all there to prevent China from being able to claim a purely defensive war. So that China is forced into, okay, I have to physically stop these ships from getting in because they are just feeding Taiwan. I can't stop them. I can't just, it's not being prevented. I have to step in. This is all, the way I've pictured this in my head is that it seems like both sides of this future conflict are essentially in a sword battle where you're preparing in your stances to find the opening and try to force your opponent into an issue that would leave him open for the end of this war. It's dirty, but it's an interesting dance, to say the least.
Mm-hmm. Jared, I think that's a great point about China keeping this conflict beneath the threshold of armed conflict, keeping it beneath the threshold of conventional war in the gray zone, really where China's been very good at operating in the gray zone and really at an exceptional level against the United States. I don't think the United States has been able to respond in the way that we would like to.
Yeah.
So
that's yes, and also keeping it defensive. What that does is prevent a lot of the narrative control for the United States, Japan, Taiwan, Philippines to everybody else and say, hey, sanction them. They started this. If you keep it defensive, you can go, no, look, they started this. We just want our land back. Mm-hmm. At the same time, basically that tries to play in China's favor. But that's why I think we're seeing all of these moves so that China can never look like it's defensive. They always have to look like they're offensive. And that makes it much easier to tell Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, hey, guys, they're going to do this to you next. They're taking action. It's not us. We're saving Taiwan. That's it.
Mm-hmm. That has also been a part of Chinese strategic messaging. The United States is the aggressor. The United States is the one fomenting instability around the world. They're the ones starting wars around the world, etc. So, all right, Jared, very interesting, and thanks for that. And we will continue to talk about Taiwan every week. All right.
Yeah, pretty much.
That, we do have, every week until we can determine that it's happening or nothing ever happens. Yeah. We'll see.
All right. We had a couple leftover questions from when you were out, so going to read those to you. They were best for you. You answered, how's the new platform going at the top of the show? So anybody that wants that, see the top of the show. John Snodgrass said, could one protester firing shots have been trying to create an overreaction by the feds, basically using law enforcement to create martyrs for the cause?
Yes, maybe. Probably not. When you look at leftist doctrine, let's start with any kind of insurgent or proto-insurgent doctrine. It is designed to draw an overreaction, because in the modern world, those overreactions get caught on camera and they're plastered all over social media, and they inflame the situation, and that stuff is used to agitate a counter response to drive anger and resentment towards a government heavily in favor of the insurgent. For all the problems that U.S. counterinsurgency doctrine had, when you go back and you read that counterinsurgency field manual and you read the joint book by General Petraeus and David Kilcullen, one of the things that they are absolutely spot on, where they're absolutely spot on, is the media is an asset of the enemy. Always, always, always. So I think the ambush on that ICE facility, I think there's a good chance they were trying to spark a revolution, or they're trying to spark more resistance, basically saying, hey, you can go out and do this. but the effect was that actually you can't go out and do this, because it failed spectacularly. And now 11, 12 of them have been arrested. They just caught that guy, yesterday? Yeah. They caught that 12th suspect now. 12 people have been arrested. So I think they've had the opposite effect just in general. But so I would say more likely than not, they're trying to kick off or spark a revolution as opposed to draw an overreaction. I mean, what's the overreaction that's going to happen there? This was at 11:30 at night on a Friday night, and you had basically standard staffing, and you had local Alvarado Police Department show up. If they shot back, they would be, or if they shot and killed a shooter, they shot and killed a shooter. That's obviously self-defense. So I don't think that's the case.
Okay. And then from Collaborating Patriot, what are your thoughts on Trump wanting to put Bessent in as the Federal Reserve Chair?
I like Bessent as Treasury Secretary, just me personally, and I base that off his media appearances and the things that he said even before he joined the administration. He was talking about the things, how to fix the U.S. economy, how to restructure the U.S. economic system, and that's when he was still at his hedge fund. I've got that somewhere. It's a multi-page paper. He outlines exactly what he's doing now. It was an excellent read, and this was, I think, in June of 2024, somewhere around there. So I will dig that out. I'll find it and I'll post it to the document library on the new Forward Observer site. There's a case. I don't know how likely it is, but one of the things that Financial Times brought up in their coverage of that this morning is there may be a case where actually Scott Bessent is simultaneously the Treasury Secretary and the Fed Chair. It's never happened before. And obviously you've had people like Yellen, who was the Treasury Secretary and the Fed Chair at different times. So my take on Bessent, I think he gets it at the strategic level, and I think you maybe could do somewhat better, but you definitely could do a whole lot worse. Do we still have that fleet that is mothballed? Are those still available to the nation? Jared?
Yes. I think we're legally bound to maintain that. But you got to run the whole thing through ship repair, make sure that it's still seaworthy. And most of those ships, prior to being mothballed, they get cannibalized like you would not believe. Basically, you find out, okay, hey, before inspection and survey, run over there, grab the parts we need, get back here. And then, oh, hey, look, we do in-serve and nothing works. But, hey, it's going to mothball, so who cares? They're not ready at all. It would probably take at least a year per hull to get them up and going, and we just don't have the capacity to do that. So yes, right. But no.
All right. Since getting out of the Army, I appreciate this format style. I feel like I'm attending a cub on deployment. Yeah, CUB, Commander's Update Brief, or I think it's Commander's Update Brief, or the BUB. We call it the BUB, the Battle Update Brief. Well, listen, we appreciate that. We're all former prior service as well, veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan, et cetera, as well. So that is what we're shooting for. I mean, give everyone a situational awareness brief on what has happened over the past roughly 24 hours, some things that happened overnight, and really a focus on the future. What can we determine is likely to happen in the future? And once we have those accurate expectations of what could or is likely to happen, then we can be better prepared for them. So I think that's one of the things that differentiates us from just reading the news. We're talking about what you can do to prepare and strategically what you can expect in the future. So thanks for that. Where are those talks located so we can watch them? So they're all up on our YouTube channel. It's TAC Intel Tuesdays, every Tuesday around 2 p.m. Central Time. And we'll also put them on the new Forward Observer website. We'll just add them to the video library there. Oh, yeah. So one of the things that I didn't want to talk about cybersecurity, I see this from a lot of people. So there's this comment here. There's maybe a couple other ones. A lot of corporations don't want to spend a lot of money on cybersecurity because how do you know that it's working? Oh, no one's attacked us today. Is that because no one has tried, or is that because our cybersecurity is working? In many cases, you don't know. So that is an inherent problem with security at all. Is you look at security spending and you try to determine how much is appropriate and how much is needless. And sometimes it's very difficult to do until you get hit with a deliberate attack by a determined actor. And then not spending money on security in hindsight was probably a bad idea. Is Taiwan part of China? I mean, depends on who you ask. Yeah. But U.S. policy that I understand, we still adhere to the one China policy, although we have threatened to upend that.
It's so
on paper.
Yeah.
On paper, it's still one China, correct?
Yes. And
but we're also
that's
running,
why China.
But we're also running guns into Taiwan, which
right.
is we're not doing to China. Yeah.
It is so messy. The simplest answer here is functionally no, but there are 3 claims. 2 of them are yes. One is yes under the Republic of China, so Taiwan's government. Yes under the People's Republic of China, and no, we are independent. And right now, no, we are independent is winning. Plain and simple, they're winning. For whether or not China, the U.S. treats it as such, functionally we adhere to the one China principle, but I think there's been some talk about, well, hey, Taiwan's not China, Taiwan's Taiwan. And that's why we've seen a lot of messaging out of China. Hey, no, there's not 2 Chinas. There's not, China, Taiwan. It's one China. But that was not signed. And the U.S. is actually, Taiwan is, let me clarify this second time. Taiwan is not a non-NATO major ally. However, the U.S. is legally bound to treat them exactly as if they were. So we're basically legally obligated to respond regardless of who the president is. We're required to give them weapons, security assistance, all of that, which treats them as separate from China.
Sure, certainly. Yeah, so I would say de facto we treat Taiwan as separate anyway. Okay.
Yeah.
Does the team feel the effectiveness of this gray zone narrative by China is losing effectiveness as more countries and people become aware of the underlying intentionality of the Chinese act? Yeah, I would say in many ways it is losing that battle. I think, this is going back to like 2017 when Rex Tillerson, who was then Secretary of State and then Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, and some other people, they went down to South America. They went like to 5 or 6 different countries, Chile, Argentina, Colombia, Peru, Brazil, maybe some more. And their message was basically, we're bringing the Monroe Doctrine back. We are going to keep China out of the Western Hemisphere, but specifically outside of South America. And that has been effective in some ways, ineffective in others. So I think a lot more countries are kind of waking up to the reality of Chinese debt diplomacy. And I mean, listen, if you're a country, there's basically only 3 camps you can fall into: U.S. aligned, China aligned, or neutral or non-committed. And you just say, look, we're going to dip our toes into the United States and China. Maybe we'll play them to see who offers us the better deal. Otherwise, we're not going to choose a side. Jared, you update this map every roughly 6 months. You look at every single country in the world based on the current government and their statements and how they're cooperating with the United States or China, and you determine if they're U.S. aligned, China aligned, U.S. leaning, China leaning, or neutral. You've been doing that for a couple of years now. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it is large. I think the effectiveness of gray zone warfare, just focusing on the narrative section, it's waning significantly. And the first big crack was in Sri Lanka when they defaulted, China seized support, and everybody's like, oh crap, hang on, we gotta help get them out. But that was just an indicator for everybody. And I think the first really big milestone of, hey, China's losing this narrative war was Panama just earlier this year. The fact that they did not re-up their Belt and Road Initiative Memorandum of Understanding is an enormous step. Nobody had done that before. Now it's showing, hey, guys, you don't have to stick with China. You don't have to be part of this. And Panama's trying to play neutral. I don't think neutrality is actually real unless you are just truly willing to go it alone. There's like one state that I think is really able to do that, but you may be equally pulled between the two. And I think that's where Panama is. That said, China's going to continue to try because that's all they really know. They can't continue to do it. And the South America mission is an enormous mission. Just when the communists took over China, there was actually, even when the Republicans took over China, there was a large outflow of Chinese that established themselves in South America, which China has used to exploit and say, hey, let's get some inroads into South America. And they've done it successfully. So it's very, very messy, but it does look like they're at least on the back foot as far as narrative goes. And you can tell that a lot of the people around them are not buying it anymore. That like Japan's running a basically first world military when they're not supposed to have a military because China's the number one threat.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, there's a lot of economic reality there as well. Like, you look at Mexico, they didn't join BRICS. They could have, potentially. All right. Any other questions there, Jared?
Yep.
All right, here, we'll do this last one, and then I'll address the last thing, and then we'll close down here. Can we connect the psychological dots here between U.S. insurgents? And by the way, you look at the far left and the riots and political violence, it does not show the requisite signs of a classic insurgency. Those indicators are just not there. But it is, and I've said this for years, it's not an actual insurgency, but it is a proto-insurgency. We do see some insurgent-like behavior, especially early stage, like phase 1, for sure, type insurgent behavior, but I don't think there's enough there to actually call it an insurgency. Insurrection, and calling it an insurrection, on the other hand, is 100% accurate. But are there psychological dots between the U.S. proto-insurgents, color revolutions, the media, the CCP, and left and communism in general? This mass narcissism is in their playbooks. Well, one of the things that we've speculated on a long time, and I don't have receipts, I wish I did, but one of the questions is how much external support is being offered to far left riots and far left organizing activities? I think a lot of that comes from within. A lot of that's either self-funded by local groups, or that money flows through NGOs, or that money flows through the financier class. But I don't know. I'm not a psychology guy, so I guess I probably can't talk about the psychological dots. All right, let's go ahead and, oh yeah, guys, let me just address one other thing. And that is, of course, there's a lot of foreign influence in the United States from a lot of different people. And regardless of what your personal opinions on some of that stuff is here, that's really, we cover foreign influence, but the specifics is just not something that let me back up a second. One of the things that you will always get from me and from Forward Observer is we call things how we see them. We don't carry water for anybody. We don't carry water for the Trump administration. We tell you what I think is the ground truth. And that's a commitment that I give you every day. I will not couch my opinions, and I won't tell you what you think you want to hear. I'm not here to blow smoke. So yes, there is obviously a problem, massive problem with foreign influence. Elite capture. There's the Israel lobby. There's Chinese elite capture. It is happening at astounding levels. Absolutely it is. And that's something that we don't shy away from. That's my personal opinion. That's kind of the analytic line here, because it's obvious that's what's going on. But you can't run your life around some of these things. All right. So which is to say there's a lot of stuff going on, and that's just not something that we dwell on every day. There's someone in the chat talking about this stuff. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that's fine. We'll move on. But there's a million places to talk about that stuff. Just here, we can cover it, but it's not going to be the core topic of what we do, just because there's a lot of stuff going on in the United States and around the world. So with that, everyone, we're up at initial operating capacity here. We're going to continue to launch some improvements on the site. However, we are up and running. If you like what we do, if you like the topics we discuss, if you want to see more of that, if you want to get access to our watch floor and get access to our news and commentary and intelligence reporting throughout the day, you can do that over at forwardobserver.com. We'd love to have you join forwardobserver.com. That's our website. Lots more to come there as well. And with that, everyone, we'll be back in your inbox tomorrow morning, back on the show starting at 08 Central Time. Until then, be well and stay out front.